on that. You can keep working on it. If you can't log in and figure it out, come back during your study hall and I will help you out. Okay? All right, so we are on page 6 and 7 of that last set of, or the last pages of the Southern colonies. In 6 and 7, we're going to look at our last little bit of what the slave codes were, how the slave culture developed, and one of our other rebellions that we need to know as we move forward. So on page 6, slave codes are, again, these unwritten laws. Do you need this? Would you mind just standing up, Alyssa, and turning that? That way we don't have to get all that. Thank you, sweetie. So, again, we talked about children become slaves. It's hard. You have to turn it really hard. Like, there we go. That's how I build up my biceps. I'm not kidding. Look at 2B. 2B is really important, and it is this idea of keeping slaves illiterate. Again, one of the things, and when we speak about the opportunity for education, that applies across the board for those people in power. Limiting people's access to education is definitely one of the ways to oppress people, right? If you can't read new ideas, you're not exposed to new systems, new political systems. And so by keeping people illiterate, you keep them subjugated, you keep them oppressed. And so that's one of the things that will happen, and it will be a crime to teach slaves to read. Now, we know that lots of people did teach their slaves to read, and we have to think about this weird part of slavery. So again, if we think about this plantation that Southern wealthy white people that enslaved people live, again, there's about 10 white people and a plantation full of slaves. Among those 10 white people will be children and will be women who are very isolated. Males have the ability to move around in society, to travel, to interact. Females did not have that luxury, or did children, and they're very isolated. So a couple of the weird things that would happen. First and foremost, that again, most aristocratic, and we have to talk about delicate topics, did not nurse their own children. They had a wet nurse, and that wet nurse was always a slave. So when we think about probably what maybe some of us think is like a really intimate kind of thing, nursing a child, white women allowed black women to nurse their babies. White aristocratic slave owning, or their parents that owned slaves would give as a birthday present a slave of the same age to their kid for a playmate. And these people developed deep bonds. Now, I will say this, the white person developed deep bonds. We always kind of infer that probably the enslaved person felt the same way, but I highly doubt it. Especially for males, these bonds would have been very tight. These men would have taken their enslaved person with them to college, and for many Northerners, it's the first real exposure they have to this weird kind of thing, like you call him your friend, but he's enslaved, kind of weirdness. Same thing for females, that females would form, and many times, this is where I'm leading, females would teach as just this kind of, and I know that maybe boys play school, I don't know, and I don't mean to be so gender specific, but I think it is a thing that we like to play school. And so in that role playing, that females often taught their female enslaved person how to read, and also as a comforting way, like to read to each other. So we will have slaves that will learn to read, and thankfully, because a lot of them become some of the people that tell the narratives of their life. So, but it is a crime and it is criminal to teach a slave to read. And it's not, again, the idea of teaching them to read. It's the idea of giving them exposure to ideas, because that's what reading does, right? It exposes you to different ideas. Conversion to Christianity, not grounds for freedom. It's one of the things, again, that will often be a test question, is this mixture that creates kind of this new religion of African beliefs and rituals with Christianity. And that will be, again, this crossover. Slave life, harshest in the lower South. Again, brutal, horrific. Fresh import of slavery is needed to sustain productivity. And on the top of page 7, tobacco growing in the middle South. Again, less deadly. Plantations are larger. Increase of female slave populations made family life more possible. And the slave population is going to increase through both birth rate. And I indicated the one major reason for that is for a white slave owner, that's free slaves. That's free slaves. America becomes one of the few slave societies in history to grow by natural reproduction, because other groups don't allow that. Now, here's what the College Board likes to ask questions about a lot, is slave culture, and how that slave culture begins in these plantations and spreads its way out. And this mixture of all of these different African, Native American, and European that creates this culture. And a lot of things that we contribute kind of as this American thing, it really comes through us through the ways of slave culture. Gullah is a language off of South Carolina, and if you've ever been out to any of those Gullah Islands, it is a really different kind of speech and inflection. Same way with the Outer Banks. The Outer Banks of North Carolina has a whole group of people that have this real different kind of, they sound probably to many people like Canadians, because they say in a boat and a road and around the creek, and they talk like this, and it's a very unusual cadence. The Outer Banks were really isolated till probably about 1950, before they got like electricity out there. Now if you go out there, it's very touristy. But I promise, when my parents used to take us out there in the 70s, it was like the worst vacation of the world, because there was nothing at Nag's Head except sand fleas and fishing. And that was not anything I like. Now Nag's Head is this big, huge, it's, just like the Florida one Ron John shop to the other. And I think except theirs is called Wings. I think they call it Wings up there. But it was a very preserved, kind of isolated culture, because to get to the Barrier Islands, you had to take a ferry. I mean, they're really isolated. Same with this Gullah type of culture. There used to be a show, I think it was Nickelodeon, a long, long time ago, about Gullah Islands. Come and let's play together in the bright sunny weather. Let's all go to Gullah Island. And so it was weird, because it was a live action show, and there was like a family, but there was a giant frog. Could never figure out, the frog was Gullah Gullah. Could never figure out how the frog played into this, because it was like a real live action show with families. Like, they got up, they ate breakfast, they went to school, and then this giant frog. Couldn't figure it out. Google Gullah Gullah Island, and you'll see, but it was, yeah. All right, on page 7, big, giant important thing that goes along with our Bacon's Rebellion is Stono Rebellion. Slave revolts happened. Again, if we think about what that would look like, again, 200 slaves overtaking 10 people, it's not that hard, but actually sustaining a rebellion is very hard. The Stono Rebellion worked a little bit because they had help from Spain. And so the Stono Rebellion takes place in South Carolina. And it takes place because the Spanish are waving the freedom flag down in Florida. And they're saying, hey, slaves, if you can get down here, however you get here, once you step across this line into Florida, that Florida-Georgia line, I don't know that song. I don't like country music, but I like just throwing that out because that's pretty cool. Once you get down here, you're free. You'll be free. Now, Spain could care less about the lives of enslaved people. They were not doing that for humanitarian gestures. They were doing it, obviously, to weaken the colony of South Carolina, because South Carolina is only a strong colony if they have slaves. So please don't misconstrue that Spain is this humanitarian trying to free the colonies from slaves. All they want is to diminish the power of the British colony. So they're waving this freedom flag. And it is the largest slave revolt in the history of the 13 colonies. So that's the one that you're asked about a lot. There's 2 slave revolts, Stono and Nat Turner. They both have different reasons. The Stono Rebellion, the significance of that is the slave system becomes more strictly controlled. After each one of these rebellions, remember, the outcome is always the same. Nothing changes for the people that rebelled, so nothing's going to change about slavery. And the authorities and power that be clamp down on those people that rebelled. So just like Bacon's Rebellion, we clamp down on the indentured servants, say we don't want any more of those, so now we're going to go get slaves. The Stoner Rebellion, we clamp down even more so on these slave codes and don't allow them any freedom. So prior to the Stono Rebellion, if we had plantations that adjoined each other, we as plantation owners would share some of the skills of our enslaved people. So let's say we had a blacksmith or a carpenter. Those enslaved people would have been of value because I could loan them out to people and charge. So if I have an enslaved person that's a blacksmith, I can hire him out. And for some part of time until the Stoner Rebellion, I might even have been magnanimous and said, I'll let you keep half of the money that you earn. But in order for my enslaved person to go and do those jobs, they had to travel. And so they would have traveling papers, which would have allowed them to move, which I think kind of like, I didn't know, most people don't get that part about slavery. They were allowed to move. Blacksmith, cabinet makers, even things like people that made brooms. These enslaved people that had skills were allowed to move and do jobs, one, to earn me, the white owner, some money, and maybe to allow them. Prior to the Stoner Rebellion, that happened often, and they just had traveling papers. And if they were stopped at any point by a militia, they show their papers, they move on. After the Stoner Rebellion, that's ended. No more, I think they were actually called walking papers. No more walking papers. No more of these papers that would allow slaves to move around. That's completely gone. And then again, what happens is we increase, again, the militia that is looking in and around those people. Bottom of page 7, Southern Society, 18th century. This Southern Society will be one of the areas in our 13 colonies that maintain a very strict social hierarchy, meaning you are definitely in a box, and we don't want you to move in and around that box. So, plantation owners at the top of the social ladder, they are in charge and they rule everything. They control the economy and they control the political power. The entire Southern economy is geared around a plantation. Every single colony is geared around a plantation. They don't develop industry, they don't develop commerce, they don't develop business. They are an agrarian, and that word we'll use a lot, an agrarian society, an agriculturally based society. Drilling that down even further, they are an agrarian society for a select few. There's nobody else that's going to be able to jump into this plantation thing. Small farmers comprise the largest social group. That would be my family. Far below prestige and power, meager existence. Perhaps, maybe at the most, owned 1 or 2 slaves. Modest size plots. And then we got these landless whites that are just moving around. And again, the landless whites have no hope for any, there's no jobs for them to have, there's no businesses for them to set up. And then we have the indentured servants, the lowest of the whites. Again, as they will decrease again as we participate in a large scale ramping up of enslaving people. And at the bottom of page 7, and this again is the connection that I hope that you can continue to make with what we did that second day of school with the map. South remain underdeveloped. And we could say this in the early 1700s and even 2020. Few cities emerged. Remember our map? We had no large cities. And even when we think about the large cities in the South, we might get one or two. And many of them are going to be in Texas, right? Not that traditional deep South that we think about. Life revolved around Southern plantation. Poor transportation, poor roads, no railroads. And when we get to 1860 and we have to figure out one of the gigantic reasons why the South lost and why the South decided to go to war even against these glaring oppositions, like you don't have roads, you don't have railroads. You're not going to be able to move. So when we get to the Battle of Gettysburg, Confederate soldiers have walked 13 miles to Gettysburg with no underwear, which, ladies, that doesn't mean a lot to us, but evidently it's a big thing to dudes to walk 13 miles with no underwear. And then you got to fight. Whereas Union, they're going to be trooped in on trains, right? So that will be the direct reflection of the fact that the South did not industrialize and did not do any of those things. Number 8, why did the colonies differ from England? Demand for labor, women came, and the importation of African slaves. So that will be what makes them distinctly different. All right, so now we're going to flip all the way back to our second set of colonies that we'll look at, that hopefully you see has the biggest set of notes. Right? Our southern colonies, we did in about 3 pages. Our poor middle colonies, they got 2 pages. New England colonies, giant. These colonies will be, again, what most people think about when they think about the early 1300, or the early 13 colonies. That these are the people that came, these are the people that really settled, and these are really the ideals that we continue to follow as we move forward as a nation. So that first page is a big, long discussion about religion. And you can look at that. We don't ask questions about that on the APUSH exam, but it is, I think, a little bit important to understand John Calvin, Martin Luther, all of these things, and what these Puritans and separatists were about. On the bottom of that first page is really where we need to get to. And this is the beginning of Henry VIII's church that he creates as he separates from Rome and the Catholic Church, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. That will be the church that these separatists belong to. The Puritans, and again, when we take that little first part of that word, pure, they are going to leave England first because they don't think the Anglican Church has removed enough of its Catholic bindings, right? And those of us that remember from AP Euro, that was not Henry's deal, right? Henry didn't really want to make a new church. He just needed a divorce. So it didn't really bother him that there was still stained glass, that there were still unmarried priests, that they still believed in communion as the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. That didn't bother Henry, but it bothered these Puritans. During this time period, though, they have to go someplace else because Puritans will be persecuted in England. So the first place they jump to is Holland. And again, my AP Euro people should remember they go to Holland because that's religiously tolerant. They let anybody in there, preach, practice whatever you want, be whatever you want. But the problem for the Puritans and the separatists in Holland is that their children were becoming Dutchified. They were losing their English and what made them English. And that is true for any immigrants that move to any country. The second generation assimilates themselves into their new home country. Puritans didn't like that, so they say, hey, we got to go someplace else. And so at the bottom of that page, Puritans, Protestants seeking reform. And then in the Puritans, we got this other group of extreme Puritans called separatists. That's our Pilgrims. They are extreme Puritans, right? They believe in even a much more strict part. On the top of page 2, you got the little Stuart line just so that you can see what that is. So on page 2, first wave, separatists left Britain for Holland. Oh, I already put that. So they could practice. They became too Dutchified. If you look at that, A, B, they're the Dutchification. And so now we got to find someplace else. And again, they are not coming for religious freedom. I guarantee if you get any question on the College Board about these Puritans, they're going to say something about religious freedom. That is not why they come here. They come here to practice their religion, to not be persecuted, not to let anybody else do it. So if you look at A2, secured rights with the Virginia Company, because they are coming to Jamestown. That's where they're coming. They've got a contract with Virginia Company, signed it, we're coming. And as a result of that, they agree, and please look at this very, very carefully. They sign a contract with a Virginia Company that we're going to work 7 years. We're going to work 7 years when we get there, sign off our passage, and we'll be good. And then we become part of the company. So this is kind of like what in modern day we call sweat equity. You work at something, and at the end you get part of that back. So these Puritans are are moving into this new world to freely practice their own faith, but also to make a profit, which again I hope nixes your idea of these little pilgrims and what they come for, because they come for profit as well. Remember, our bedrock, our first layer of the American country is capitalism, followed by rebellion, which we've already had 2, and we're not even a country yet, Bacon and Stono. So Mayflower comes, they leave way too late in the season. They leave way, way, way too late. It takes about a month to cross the Atlantic at this point. You need to leave England in the spring. They should have left March, April. They left June, July, which put them in the Atlantic during storm season, which blew them way the heck off of their desired, and they land in Plymouth Bay, which is in and around modern day Boston, or those of you that can visually see Massachusetts with that cute little fish hook right there. That's where they're going to land. Now they're in trouble because, one, they expected, and their expectation was they were going to move into Jamestown. It's 1620. Jamestown's been there, whatever 1620 minus 1607 is. I don't know what that is. They've been there a while. They got a fort. They got buildings. These people expected to hop off a boat and move into a town, and even be it a small town, but a town with buildings. There's some place where there's nothing. And so they have to rethink everything they do. And as a result of that, they come up with this awesome thing. Wait, let's go to 4C. Settlers realize they have no legal right. Now, that's one thing about these English people, right? They get the idea, and again, why the reason when we win our revolution, we're able to govern because we were colonized by English. They know there's legal ways to do everything. And the first thing they realize before they even get off the ship is we don't have a legal right to be here. Now, they're not saying that because of Indians. Don't get me wrong on that. It's not. They're saying that because they understand pieces of paper that give you rights to things. So if we're going to settle on this land that's not Jamestown, we got to have a piece of paper that says we have a right to be here and how we're going to do this. And we come up with this awesome new thing called the Mayflower Compact. Please note in my parentheses, this is not our first Constitution. We're going to get that in Connecticut. But it is an agreement, and it is the first step towards this idea of building some kind of government based in and around and a kind of sort of about democracy. The purpose of the Mayflower Compact is to legitimize, I hate that word, I can't ever say it, Pilgrims' establishment outside Virginia. They know that they have no legal right to be there. So how do we do this? While they're on the ship, and the ship also, hopefully you understand, is not all pilgrims. half of them are pilgrims, and then half of them are soldiers going to Jamestown, just like John Smith did, to find gold and to dig. So we've got these very two distinctive groups. We've got our Puritans with their black hats, and they're not working on the Sabbath, and they don't celebrate Christmas and all this stuff. And then we got soldiers with their wives trying to intermix. Those are two diametrically opposed groups. But they come up with this Mayflower Compact, creating a secular document. For those of you that don't know the word secular, that means non-religious. Even though these are devoutly religious people, it's non-religious. Recognizing James I as their sovereign. So we are creating this settlement in the names of James I, our sovereign, our leader, and a body of settlers with power to devise laws and elect leaders. And what we get is this 5B, majority rules. Now, again, we need to kind of smack that little thing around. Is majority rules democratic? No, it is not. Unless you're the majority, right? If you are not the majority, that's not democratic, because you're never going to get to speak. Hence, why majority rules kept people out of the political process for so long. Like women. So make sure when we think about this majority rules, it is not democratic. So if you're in your friend group and you're trying to pick a movie and you don't like horror movies and every single other one of your friends like horror movies, do you feel that it's a democratic process in picking the movie? No. No, not at all. However, again, becomes an important seed in democracy. The idea that these people on this ship understood they needed some kind of governing body. We're coming to a place where there's not anyone and there's no existence, and we need to make laws. And again, this Mayflower Compact was for men, and that's it. Adult male settlers assemble to make laws, conduct open discussion town meetings, and that's going to turn into what we establish in New England as these town hall meetings. I don't think, even if you have no interest in politics whatsoever, that in the last year you have not heard that word somewhere. A town hall meeting, some candidates having a town hall meeting. And what a town hall meeting is, and it is a very New England kind of thing, is everyone has permission to speak. Everyone has permission to speak. So if I go to the school board to speak, I have to technically get on the agenda. In most larger places, so if I was going to a school board meeting in Indianapolis at IPS, in order to speak at a school board meeting in IPS, I would have to get on the agenda. And there's a process for that. You can, but there's a process. Because that, I'm assuming, because that school board probably is larger than anything we can probably imagine, that school board meeting, that in order to do that. And town hall meetings, anyone can speak. And it, again, will be a New England type of political way of governing that we won't really see anywhere else. On page 3, we get the first Thanksgiving, and this is the English-speaking American Indian Squanto. Anybody want to guess why he can speak English? Because he was enslaved several times. Squanto was enslaved by several different groups of white people who just came and left, so he could speak English. By 1921, 20 acres of American Indian corn provided food. Pilgrims adopted American Indians' traditional custom of giving thanks. Peace is going to last 41 years. So for 41 years, these Puritans live in peace until Musasawat dies in 1662, and then all HE double toothpicks explodes. I mean, it goes like crazy. So, why were the Pilgrims or the Separatists successful? A couple of reasons. They developed an economy not based on agriculture. That's what they thought they were going to do. Not going to do it. Their economy developed around fur, fishing, and lumber. And lumber being one of the most important. The 13 colonies has lots of trees. Lots of trees. England, not so much. Europe, not so much. Timber and lumber becomes one of the most successful economic productivities for the 13 colonies. Religion, paramount. Paramount means at the top. William Bradford will be elected governor 30 times. I just throw out Miles Standish because I like him. He's military leader. Massasoit honors a treaty until his death. Pilgrims attack him a whole lot. He never fights back because he made a treaty. In 1691, the small Plymouth colony of 7,000 people merges with Massachusetts Bay Colony in BC. So again, those are separatists, those that come. And then we've got these other groups called Puritans. So the people that come first are those separatist, on steroid kind of Puritans. Massachusetts Bay are just regular Puritans. Okay? So again, why the Puritans come? This group comes because Charles I said, you can persecute Puritans. Charles I, a devout Catholic, you can persecute them. And that persecution was sometimes death. So don't just think like we're going to stand on the street corner and hold signs against you. Sometimes we're going to kill you. On the top of page 4, NBC founded in 1629 by non-separatist Puritans. So these Puritans are just regular Puritans, just your regular old, the Church of England is not pure enough, it still has too many Catholic things, and we're going to go and move across the Atlantic. And then in the 1620s, we have this great migration of a lot of Puritans. 2,000 of these are going to arrive in Boston. And by that point, most of the people survive. We're past that whole starving time and we don't know how to survive. English Civil War is going to send more people over. And so this great migration settles Massachusetts Bay Colony as a large, thriving, religious colony of only Puritans. Only Puritans. And the most important Puritan in Massachusetts Bay Colony is John Winthrop. He is the governor of Massachusetts Bay, and he preaches this idea of a covenant theology, and a covenant is a promise. Winthrop believed that Puritans had a covenant with God, a promise with God, to create this new religious experiment. And he writes, "We will build a city upon a hill, a model of Christian charity." And we, as Americans, have used that city upon a hill in reference to democracy. That's not what John Winthrop meant. We kind of twisted it around. But it's a great phrase. And we've added things, a shining city. Probably just about every president from the 1940s on, regardless of their political party, has claimed this phrase. Because it's a great phrase, a city on a hill. We're this model of democracy. That is not what John Winthrop meant at all. Because John Winthrop was not about a democracy at all. But that's what it comes to mean. Of the New England colonies, Massachusetts is the big one. It's the most influential. Religion and politics, entwined, but not. It's kind of weird. So governing open to all free males belonging to the Puritan congregation. So that's the weird part. The only way you can govern was to belong to the Puritan church. Now that's another myth, that everybody belongs to the Congregational Puritan Church. Not everybody could. Not everybody could. And this, I want you to think about Puritans, because Puritans did not open church membership to everyone. It was not everybody could be a member of the Puritan church. It was a select few. They were very, very selective. And in being selective, they almost selected themselves out of existence so that they had to change how they allowed membership in their church. Percentage of eligible office holders was more than in England. And again, eventually, Puritan churches will be called the Congregational Church. So that's what New England is, a Congregational Church. I think Terre Haute has a Congregational Church. Not a lot of Congregational churches in the Midwest, definitely hardly any in the South. But you go into New England and upstate like New York, Congregational churches everywhere. So when we say Congregational Church, that's the same as like saying a Methodist church or a Baptist church. The Church of England changes its name to the Congregational Church, and that becomes the Church of New England. Again, those town hall meetings will emerge as a sample of democracy. Votes conducted by majority rule, show of hands. And at the top of page 3, as we're talking about this democracy thing, on the top of page 3, make sure you understand, because I know this is a test question. I actually think it's a quiz question. The purpose of government was to enforce God's laws, which to us, because we have this whole separation of church and state thing, doesn't sound democratic at all, right? But the Puritans say the only reason that we have a government is to enforce God's laws. That's it. That's it. That's why we have it. Oh gosh, people, tell me. Don't just keep staring at the clock. I just think you're all ready to leave. Say, hey, Norris. Because I could talk about this all day.